Hello and welcome to the Ghibli Rewatch series of the Overly Animated Podcast, where we'll be going through every Studio Ghibli movie chronologically from the beginning. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Alex Bonilla.
Hello.
And April Collins.
Hi there.
Join us in rewatching or watching for the first time every Studio Ghibli movie now that they're available for streaming on HBO Max and Netflix in HBO Max United States, Netflix, everywhere else. New podcasts every Wednesday as we go through the whole Ghibli catalog chronologically at overlyanimated.com. I'm a Ghibli expert joined by co-hosts with a variety of Ghibli experience here. Our second to last one in the Ghibli Rewatch series here is we've reached the tale of Princess Kaguya. Full spoilers for this film. Make sure you've seen Princess Kaguya, either dubbed or subbed. Doesn't matter. We'll be talking both, primarily the subs, but watch whatever, and you should be fine for this podcast. Okay, so this is the tale of Princess Kaguya, 2013 film by Isao Takahata. Takahata was in his late 70s for the 8-year production of this movie. This was his last film. He died 5 years after the release of this movie. This movie is co-written by Riko Sakaguchi. So another one of the, seems like a majority, if not almost all of these later Ghibli films were co-written by women, which I didn't know previously. This is, so if you're unaware, you should be aware, but maybe unaware to American or non-Japanese audiences, Kaguya is based on the 10th century Japanese folklore tale, the tale of the bamboo cutter. This is the oldest Japanese narrative that we know of. So it's pretty kind of vital context. This is like a very well-known Japanese folk tale that they are making a version of here. This is a fairly faithful adaptation of the tale, that Takahata does. Apparently, this is maybe a Wikipedia thing, but they say this is the most expensive Japanese film ever made. At least probably the one we know the budget of, I guess. I think was not very successful financially, as Takahata movies tend to do, but was very successful critically, one of those rare movies that has a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. So let's get into Kaguya. Very excited about this one. Alex, you've been on, I think, a majority of our Takahata podcasts here, and we've reached the end of, we've reached Takahata's final film. So what do you think of this?
So, up to now, the Takahata oeuvre has been meandering, realist, and digging into female stories for a lot of them. This continues that path. It's definitely obvious and also aesthetically interesting to watch. And I think that's been the highlight. The one thing that I knew coming into this is that this is more of a pencil drawn kind of movie, and maybe not as much as Yamada's, but it had its own unique style, and I really enjoyed it in this movie. There's one sequence in particular that uses it to full advantage. Otherwise, it feels very consistent throughout, which was a little bit of a surprise for Takahata. But story wise, I think that it really it's got a lot of momentum going. Kaguya is they do some interesting stuff with her character in terms of showing her struggle with growing up. Figuring out her destiny, dealing with humanity and all. The first third of the movie that takes place in the rural areas, I really enjoyed. It definitely brought me back to Only Yesterday in terms of just how lovingly it portrays rural life, and while at the same time getting into the developing of human relationships. Middle part, to me at least, kind of sagged just because the story stuff, having to do with suitors and all, it's not necessarily something that I'm that interested in, but I know that that's a big part of the original folktale, and we got to stay faithful to that. So that's a choice to make. They did what they could with it. But I think that once we get to the turn in the third act, and you get the revelation about her character, I think that it picks back up. It definitely hits all the emotional notes that you want out of it. I think that's another strength of Takahata. When especially harkening back to Grave of the Fireflies, when we need to get into melodrama, he can do it. So I think that Kaguya was It was a very well-made movie. It definitely has its high points, It's not at least for me, like that I do have my nitpicks, which like keeps me from like saying like it's the best Takahata movie. But like I see I understand why there was so much praise, because I do remember like even back years ago, like the praise that came over. I remember there was some arguments about like the fact that this was snubbed for the Oscar. I feel like was the first time I was aware of like people being sick of Pixar and Disney winning all the awards, like because of Kaguya. So like I understand the praise that this gets, and I think we'll go through a lot of what makes this movie special. And yeah, but it was a really good movie, with definitely some particular stuff related to Kaguya herself that I enjoyed the most.
Nice. Yeah, was nominated for the Best Animated Feature, but did lose, as all Ghibli's have except for Spirited Away. More a reflection of the Oscars than the Ghibli films, I would say. April, what did you think? And yeah, this is both your guys' first time, I believe, with this movie. What did you think of Kaguya, April?
So, because I guess like because I had watched like Takahata like movies previously, like to this one, on this podcast, so I kind of like knew a little bit better of what to like, I guess, not expect, if that makes any kind of sense. I love that this is based off a Japanese folktale, and I like with that, I think that like the animation like style that they chose and everything like that was just gorgeous. Like it looked like it came off of a scroll, which I loved. Like I thought it was very like pretty. I really connected with Kaguya's like emotional, like I guess like from her like being, you know, like sort of learning in the rural world, and then even with like the part of it with like all of the suitors and everything like that, I was just like, oh, like I feel you, sister. Like so like I connected to the movie a little bit more than I thought I was going to. And I liked the music. I thought it was very like it added to everything, especially whenever she was playing her instrument thing that I can't remember now. I just thought that was very, very beautiful. I watched the dub version of this, by the way.
Oh.
So I'm like stepping outside my comfort zone and watching the dub versions, because I know you guys are like, we're all, you know, the majority of us prefer subs. I thought the dub cast was really great. I looked it up or saw it in the credits afterwards as well. There was a couple of like larger names, and I was like, didn't catch it, which again I think speaks to like the voice acting that goes into it. If you're a big name and I don't recognize your voice, then I think you've done a good job for the most part, unless it's really bad. So I really liked this movie. I even like teared up at the end just a little bit too. So I liked it. I enjoyed this movie a lot.
Nice. Yeah, I noticed, I've not seen the dub, but I've noticed that the 5 random suitors are all voiced by kind of pretty big names, so they got some a lot of actors for these minor parts here.
One dub question I have: her like assistant lady, did she sound more like Bubblegum or like Starfire? Like what voice did you get out of her?
Neither, which it was very strange.
Oh, okay, yeah. that is Hinden Walsh. So like, did she be like the one voice that I'd probably like keep an ear out for? But okay.
I'm trying to think of which voice I was the most, like if there was one that I was the most distracted by, but there wasn't really any, like I couldn't like pick it out. And then I was like, oh, okay, because the Kaguya is Chloe.
Yeah, she's Chloe Grace Moretz, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I watched like a second of it for like a scene with her and mom's Mary Steenburgen, who I know. So I noticed some of the voices in there. Yeah, a lot of big names. We can go through it, I think, as we bring up some characters potentially. Lucy Liu in this, Daniel Day Kim, John Cho. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Nice. So yeah, I've always been a really big fan of Kaguya. I'll be very some very high praise there. I think this is an incredible, gorgeous movie. I think this is a masterpiece. I think this is Takahata's magnum opus. I think you'll hear this from a lot of people. I'm certainly on board. I think this is like Takahata's one film that finally can rival some of Miyazaki's greats. Like, I think this is potentially a top 5 Studio Ghibli film. I think this is one of the most gorgeous movies ever created. I've said this like a bunch on this podcast, but it's especially true of this one. And like, this is kind of a culmination of Takahata's, exploring different animation mediums, and he does stabilize it a little bit here, but still has a few experimental scenes which are absolutely incredible. I think the ending was hugely affecting for me. So like, this is a little bit more of a traditional story than his previous 2, which were a little out there. But it keeps the emotional resonance that he gets from being freeform while still having like the stability of the narrative and the characters. Like, I really loved the ending. I think he has some incredible third acts, I think, in every single one of his movies. So I think that's a big strength of him. I read the ending as a commentary on the human condition, which I know is very generic, but I think that's kind of what this movie is generally supposed to be about. And all of Takahata's films. I wrote down this, like, Kaguya is a summation of all of Takahata's films on the human condition. He's made films about the extreme anguish and sadness, just extreme anguish and sadness, such as Fireflies and Pompoko, I think, for a lot of it. He's also made films about joy, extreme joy, such as like Only Yesterday and Yamada's, I think, for large amounts of those films. But I think all of those films do kind of explore the extremes of human emotion, in their own way. This film is one last encapsulation of his exploration of what makes us human, the good and the bad, but always feeling. So I think that's I think what my read on what he's going for here.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make about like this being a common theme with Takahata, because this did remind me a little bit of Pompoko in terms of like it like part of the realism is like showing that life, it does kind of beat you down sometimes. Like I mentioned in my initial thoughts that the second act like feels kind of saggy, but at the same time, I think that it does fit in line with Takahata's deal of like, look, like you're gonna go through a lot of stuff in your life that like beats you down, that like get like sucks the energy out of you, and like that's like Kaguya. Like we had the first part where like she's introduced, so like this is the joy that you can experience in human life, like being able to like have relationships with people. Then you get taken into the quote real world, and you get sucked in by all the norms and traditions that you have to follow, and that can take a lot out of you to the point where you're not getting the most out of life. And then the third act shows like even through all that, she still wants to be a human, because she wants to take the highs with the lows. Like she comes to a conclusion that like that is preferable to just forgetting pain and suffering. Like that's not the life that she wants. And I think that that's a big thing with Takahata. Like, yes, life can suck sometimes, but also life can be really, really great, and you can still appreciate the victories in life. Again, that's a very similar message to Pompoko, actually. Like to the point where like this could be construed as a bit of a sad ending, where like she does have
definitely a sad ending, yeah.
Oh,
yeah, like she does leave. She's forced off of this, but like on the whole, the message is like kind of like reassuring in a way. Like yeah, like there is a way to like live life and like hang on to the stuff that makes you happy, even if you have to deal with so much trash in the middle of your life.
Yeah, so I think all that definitely true, and definitely what he's going for. And yeah, I agree the second act is maybe the hardest to watch, but it's all about the anguish of life and is a lot about dealing with social norms in life. And I think probably Takahata has his a little bit of like a feminist characterization twist in his telling on how he conveys the second part of the movie and all of Kaguya's experiences. But yeah, it's about, this is the anguish, and it's incredibly striking when she still wants to live and be human in spite of everything, all of the sadness she's been through. It's because it's better to feel. You'll feel bad, you'll feel good sometimes, but it's better to feel it all than not to feel, I think is definitely a big thing that the main thing that he's going for here, and I think a main thing from all of his movies. I agree, Pompoko is like a clearest encapsulation. I think that's his previous like epic, kind of like this movie that's kind of going for this wide range, this high level, wide ranging storytelling. But I think it even goes back to Grave of the Fireflies. I think that's what he's largely talking about there. They suffer immensely in that movie, and still one of the highlights you feel is that they still feel joy through it, even through the incredible, terrible their experiences they're going through. They still feel the joy of living. April, how much did you get? I mean, I think like her speech at the end is a big component of kind of this theme that Takahata is trying to convey. Oh, and I was going to say that I was going to start to bring in there's a documentary about this movie. I was very excited to finally see behind the scenes on Takahata, which I haven't seen a lot of, but Isao Takahata and his Tale of Princess Kaguya is an accompanying documentary for this movie. He talks about how he thinks, he interprets the ending of the movie as Kaguya dying. She goes back to the moon people, but her life as a human is over. And so I think it's kind of a representation of our lives. Like, we will die one day, but, and we will go through pain, but it's all worth it to experience the emotions that come with living. I would say is probably the main message that the movie's going for. April, any thoughts on that? How much you took away that from the film?
Oh, I definitely took away all of that. And also, just to add to it as well, you kind of get a sense of sort of like how like everything is like cyclical is the word, I think. So like, because she comes to us in the beginning as, this baby from the moon, or, I mean, she sort of transforms into a baby, and then we see her go through an entire life process. And then at the end, we get that very, like, after she sort of like dies and goes back to the city of the moon, we see like that image of her as a young child again. And whenever like I saw that, the first thing I thought of was how she talked about there was a woman who she knew that went to the earth and sort of did what she did as well. But like, was always sad because she wanted to go back. And I was like, I wonder if that's just like another like sort of reincarnation of yourself that you're remembering. And you've held on to that memory through each sort of regeneration that you've gone through. So I thought that was kind of like even though like having the image of the baby at the end was sort of like strange, like that's kind of what I took away from all of that as well. So yeah, she's gone this time around, but she'll come back because you can't stay, like you don't really get a choice. You you go where you need to go or where you're summoned, kind of thing. So
yeah, I do think that's the most ambiguous part of the movie, when she's recounting what she remembered when she realizes she's a moon person and she recalls this princess on the moon. I definitely interpret that as herself. But I didn't necessarily think of it as a reincarnation thing. That's interesting. I will say there is a Buddha at the end of the movie who is the leader of the moon people. So I think that would play into the Buddhism vibes you get, like any amount of reincarnation. But maybe just a previous, like, I guess she is kind of reincarnating in a way when she puts on the garment, which makes her forget everything. So remembering her previous experiences.
To be fair, I did not really understand the shot of the baby. I just thought like, it was just like a 2001 A Space Odyssey thing. But like I couldn't really fit that together. But I will say that the story of her like recalling the woman on the moon, and like she was talking about how like she saw her crying, and she thought to herself like, what would make this person like feel so much about the earth? So like I at least take it like, oh, like no, there is like a different person who did this, and because in this moon society, it seems that like emotion is deemed impurity. Like the people, when they come down in that final scene, they talk about like, we will make you pure. So like implying like this like feeling of pain and happiness is wrong per se. So like she's seeing this woman crying. It's like I want to see what causes that. Like, well, what would need to happen in your life to feel those kind of things? And so and so in that sense, it could be a little bit hopeful as well if you think like, oh, like someone else will see her crying and will wonder the same thing. Like, well, why would this person be crying up on the moon where everything is great? And look into that. So like, again, like it's all intertwining. Like pain leads to like you can't have happiness without a little bit of pain. So like that feels like something Takahata's into.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the main thing I think he's into, and vice versa. Yeah, it's I like these interpretations. It's unclear. It's possible if we're more familiar with the fable growing up, like Japanese people are, we would have a better sense of that part of the movie. I will say it is a little bit, without knowing the bamboo cutter fable that well, it is a little jarring when she's like, "I'm a moon person," right? But
well, I'll say it's actually it's a good move that they don't dive too much into that, because then like it would veer off into like sci-fi. I think they keep it just vague enough that it still fits in like the folkloric side.
I think it feels
like,
Yeah.
because I was like reading up on it a little bit, and I like saw like other interpretations of that story, like also like bring in like flying saucers and stuff, and I'm like, like if we went down the sci-fi route, it would be a different movie. I'm not sure it would be a better movie. I think I like that it feels tonally fitting with the rest of the movie, that it is like vaguely religious, almost like dealing with like purity and the Buddha, you know. So I think we're better off not knowing too much about this moon society.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it fits with the original story. Is basically what he presents the outline of it, and it's like that's why she's a moon person, because that's how the story works. But it is interesting, I think, approaching it from an American audience, I assume, lens. I think it's probably very different than having grown up with the story and seeing a telling of it like this. But I'm sure Takahata makes it his own in his own ways, and in spite of this being a fairly straightforward adaptation. I guess I have some backstory on that. We can bring in quotes from Colin, Odell, and Michelle LeBlanc from their book, The Studio Ghibli, The Films of Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. They say part of the reason for the unusual length of the film, referring to the fact that it's over 2 hours, is that Takahata embellishes the fairy tale. The original story is very much plot-driven, the discovery of the princess, the suitor's quest for her hand, and her return to the moon. But Takahata added a number of elements, most notably Sutamaru's character, and chose to focus on the characterization. So yeah, I think the biggest like narrative difference is Sutamaru as a character is added, and then I think the approach is Takahata wants to focus more on Kaguya as a person and dive into what she's going through and what she's feeling. Would be his main spin on what's happening, and I think that ties into his thematic approach of what he's trying to convey at the end with her speech and throughout the entire movie. Yeah, I want to talk about the well, just briefly, I mentioned I thought this is Takahata's magnum opus. I think this is a common thing you'll hear about this movie. He says in the documentary, this is kind of like pulled into the opening of the movie. I don't know what the context for him saying this was, but he said, I'm not thinking that because it's my last work, I have to sum everything up and make this my magnum opus. It just came out that way. I suppose any of them could have been my last film. Which I think I kind of agree with, because he's a similar message through all of his movies. It's I mean, we've been going through Takahata's movies. This is one of the big joys of this series for me, was exploring Takahata in depth. It's not something, I think these movies are not, except for this one, which I do think is probably the most accessible, maybe in Fireflies, maybe Only Yesterday a little bit, like his movies aren't as easily to be appreciated without diving into them in depth, I would say. The ones he creates at Studio Ghibli, because of course he did have a storied career, but even before coming to Studio Ghibli. So I think just diving into all the aspects of this has been really incredible. And I think this movie like works even better as you see his progression of what he's trying to do artistically, thematically, grow throughout the films he does at Studio Ghibli. Like I do think it's a similar story to the ones he's been telling. I think he conveys it in the best way thematically, the most gorgeous way with the animation. So I love this as kind of a pinnacle of everything Takahata's been doing. What do you think of that, Alex?
Well, I want to live in the world where the Yamadas is the last movie he made.
Yeah, he says in the documentary, he's like, I didn't think I was going to do another one after Yamada's.
Well, like, I'm thinking, like, nobody would be. I mean, the Yamadas is a good movie, but like, nobody would be calling it a magnum opus just because of like the way it works. Whereas Kaguya, like, it fits more in line with the Studio Ghibli fare. Like, it's an epic in a setting that feels like removed from our time with some fantasy elements like that. That's more in line, and that's why like it feels it feels fitting as like that's the way to go out on. Also, like with regards to like this being around for a while, it's just like from the Yamadas, like that opening sequence, like one of the first things is like them cutting their kid out of the bamboo.
Yeah, that was also inspired by the same.
Yeah, so like I'm wondering, like, man, like it really, like he just like on and off thinking about this story for like over a decade.
yeah, no, I know. I read even before that he'd been thinking of doing this movie since like the 70s or 80s. So definitely on his mind.
Yeah, so I'm glad he took all the time he needed. I will say also related to like just overall context, like I did end up watching the Kingdom of Dreams and Madness after the Wind Rises, and like they touched a little bit on Kaguya. Apparently they originally were trying to have them both, the Wind Rises and Kaguya released simultaneously, which is just insane to me because like Totoro and Grave is one thing. I mean that's insane in itself, but at least the lengths make sense. This like both of those movies are really long, and also like now we're in like a box office focused world where like do you really want two movies when you're saying studio cannibalizing each other? Like I just wonder what the thought process was.
I think it's like the last film of the two last films of Japan's two greatest animators ever. I think it's a huge event if that happens.
I guess, but I think it's for the best. They did not.
It's possible financially it's better, although this movie didn't set the world on fire financially. But this movie, they cover it in both documentaries. So the Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, as always, I would say that's my number one recommendation for a Ghibli documentary. Number two, I think, would be this one, to see a lot of Takahata. And you see more of, there's like a culminating scene in Kingdom of Dreams and Madness of Miyazaki and Takahata actually talking, and there's a few of them in this one, in this documentary of them talking.
It's very funny in Kingdom that they keep talking about him, but like he never shows up until like the very end, and they get like a couple sentences out of him, and that's it. So it's just he's like a looming figure, but he never shows up.
It doesn't talk a ton, but as you learn in this, they made a separate studio for the production of Kaguya, this movie. So he's like in a different location. He needed a separate studio because he has a completely different animation process. We'll get to that in a second, that they wanted to get to. April, what do you think of this as Takahata's final film, and as a film many people think of a magnum opus for him?
I think it's good. Like, I think that it works as sort of his, like, it works as his last film simply because, for me at least, because it does have sort of like a clear story. Like, I love My Neighbor the Yamadas, but like that one was sort of like all over the place, and it was a lot of different short stories, and while like that one was also, incredibly animated and everything like that, I think this one sort of serves that purpose more, in the fact that it ended up being his like actual last movie, is kind of like, it's sad, but like it makes you like appreciate it more, because he was like 70 whenever he made this movie. Like that's so impressive. Like
he was like 78 when it finally came out. Oh gosh,
so he was like 80 when it came out. So that's like incredibly impressive, and to also like put so much time and effort into something is just, I mean, like that says a lot. Like, people can put a lot of like time and effort into something, and then it ends up being really bad. But this like totally pays off. Like 8 years, okay, I see that. Like that it like you can see like the quality and the time that went into this, and it wasn't just sort of like, let's crank out one more before I die, and try and make some money. Like, it's sad that it didn't make any money at the box office, but I mean, I don't care, because I still got to watch it either way. So.
Yeah, right.
My personal thought on the magnum opus description specifically, I think at least to me, the way I view the Takahata legacy is that Kaguya with Grave feel like just very fitting bookends to his career. Like, Grave is Takahata at his most calibrated, but still like visually interesting in different ways. Kaguya is Takahata like at his most like it's exploratory, like really like this is like his feels like a full on passion project, and so like it's been nice to like see the progression from Grave to Kaguya. So like, I personally like slightly take Grave over Kaguya. I can see the other direction, but I think in general, I think rather than like elevating one over the other, they just both feel like um, perfect displays of Takahata's capability as a director in like the two directions that his career ended up going.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's valid. There's for sure a lot of people that think Grave of the Fireflies is one of the best movies ever. Think that's great. Like, and of course, as I said a few times, we should be considering we're missing half of his career here pre Ghibli.
Yeah, his Ghibli career specifically.
His Ghibli careers, but no, I think he's doing more traditional stuff. Comes in, does Grave, which is kind of like a traditionally animated at least, but definitely like not typical animated fare in terms of the story. And then eventually starts pivoting hard in like what he's trying to do animation wise, and ends up with Kaguya. Which I mean, to me, like a big part of the Takahata legacy when you look back on his Ghibli films is his innovation in the medium of animation, which this is, I think, a culmination of his exploration of that. It's I want to talk about the animation of this film because to me the most interesting part of the documentary was all the talk of how they make the movie. Of note, I didn't even know this. Takahata is not a drawing person. Apparently, he's not even much of an artist himself. He does do rough storyboard sketches, which are then turned into further storyboards by his storyboard artist Osamu Tanabe. It's Takahata comes in with more of like a story background than the drawing background. But I thought that's interesting. But yeah, so this I do think like we the three of us talked about Yamada's, and this is basically the same style he was going for in Yamada's as this movie. Apparently, according to the documentary, when Yamada's completely broke the Studio Ghibli production process because he has he's just doing something completely different. Takahata talks like passionately in the documentary about him being tired of traditional cell animation, which is what Studio Ghibli does for the most part, and so he wants this sketch style where he really wants to bring these initial rough sketches, which he views as passionate. He likes that they're not cleaned up. He wants to bring those to life. So he animates rough sketches with like light colors and lots of white space. That to me was the biggest thing I remembered from Yamada's. And this movie is a lot of white space, a lot of not finished backgrounds, but there are like gorgeous watercolor backgrounds as well in both films, which is very atypical. I mean, I think the animation is striking. It's very polished despite its being like, it's polished in its roughness. I think the roughness and the passion is communicated, but it's consistent and versus versus a Yamada's. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's key about it is like, well, I think that he does a good job at picking the kind of story that fits with the style he's going for. So like Yamada's reason that works is like a very basic cartoony style is because it's like a family sitcom. Like it's as if you're like animating a newspaper comic, so that style fits for that kind of story. And with Kaguya, it's a similar thing where like this is a story that's taking place in like the 10th or 11th century. So you're imitating the art that comes from that time period, where it's like just like very vague watercolors, like kind of charcoal pencils and the like. So like you're imitating that, and because you're doing that, it looks so much different from the rest of animated movies. So I think that he just does a really good job of like picking styles that fit with the kind of stories that he wants to tell.
Yeah, I think this fable really does fit with this style. I would agree. Here's what Odell and LeBlanc have to say about the animation in this movie. First, they say Takahata's animation is a fantastical spiritual element has a fantastical spiritual element to the fairy tale, which enhances the original story. I like these spiritual, like description of the animation. I think it's
and again, that's another theme of Takahata's stuff. Again, like going back to Pompoko as well, where like there is this vague sense of like how much is God directing affairs here, especially with the dad going on until we get the revelation of the third act. But like that's just like another thing that does have a through line in several of Takahata's movies.
I think there's a sense of spirituality. I think what's interesting about any sort of notion of religion in this movie is that he kind of goes against the kind of Buddhist philosophy of leaving your earthly desires behind, right? Like that's kind of his whole message. Yeah. It's like, no, we want the earthly desires. Like that's what makes us human. So he kind of has the Buddha in this villain role almost with the moon. I don't think it's supposed to be a villain, but it's just supposed to be like, this is a thing, but it was really about her experience as a human. It's interesting. Okay, anyway, continue the animation quote. They say, Takahata's project has resulted in a highly unusual form of anime, most notably with its visual design, which has such a distinctive style. Rather, as in My Neighbor the Yamadas, Takahata pushed the boundaries of what was perceived to be normal in anime and from a design perspective, resulting in a finished production that is as artistic as can be imagined in anime or any form, a combination of inked pen and watercolor or pastel art. The artwork often references compositions seen in traditional woodcuts or scrolls. Takahata also shuns the use of consistent background art, occasionally showing the characters sit against a blank canvas. Particularly interesting is the boldness with which he sometimes literally sketches out scenes. Characters occasionally lose form and shape before the art reacquires definition and detail. The scene where Kaguya returns to her hometown during her naming banquet is almost abstract in execution as she runs away, leaving trails of colorful kimono in her wake. It's remarkable because the animation feels so organic and fluid, yet is meticulously conceived and animated with absolute precision. So they hone in on one of the two scenes I want to highlight with regards to the animation here.
Well, that scene felt to me like the one scene in this movie where it's like you really like we've talked about like there are show off scenes in each of these Takahata movies.
This is the highlight scene.
Yeah, that's like the one scene, and like it works so well for that particular moment because like honestly, you want to get across like Kaguya is like losing her mind and like how terrible the situation is, and she just wants to get away as fast as possible. She wants this entire situation to not exist anymore. So you have like the drawing, like stuff, like the background is like literally fading off into just like random pencil strokes going in random directions, and like her drawing specifically like kind of like loses shape as she gets further away from the capital. So like at that scene, I kind of wish there was more of that, like really taking advantage of this pencil style that this movie is using. But that one scene is very effective in what it's doing, and I love it for that.
It's this black kind of abstractness you get from the scene. April, what do you think of that scene?
I loved that scene. I think that the way that, I mean, as you guys have been discussing, I think that the way that like it's sort of composed and how Alex described that it's sort of trailing off and like losing shape, like I think that just fits in so well with what's going on in the scene. And I can't think of any other like person getting away with that kind of sort of style, or at least no one that I've come across in terms of animation. And so it was such a gorgeous scene despite the context of what was going on.
Well, it feels like something you'd see in like a short film, like randomly, like Aha's "Take on Me" music video. Like that's a short piece of animation that uses pencil drawn to its benefit, in a way like that. But like for feature films, you never really get that kind of experimentation, except in like the Takahata movies, where
Takahata's other movies,
he likes inserting these into otherwise consistently styled movies. Yeah, so like Takahata is the rarity in the feature film for sure.
Yeah, well, I think he's the biggest innovator in the medium that we've ever talked about in the podcast. I mean, Miyazaki in terms of overall storytelling, but Takahata in terms of the literal art of the medium.
Yeah, Miyazaki won't go for a pencil drawn interlude.
It doesn't seem like his thing. Any of what Takahata is doing here doesn't seem like his thing. But I think this scene is one of the all-time great scenes in anything. I think this is just incredibly hugely affecting, conveying. We talked about this This is the whole movie is about the anguish and the joy of life. This is the climax of the anguish part of what we experience, I think, watching Kaguya's story and seeing it told through this like jagged, like very abstract, very simple. Like it's so striking that it just becomes literal, like only a few lines on the screen at some point with like a shot of the moon and her running, and her leaving the kimonos behind.
I think also like the camera shakes at some point during there. Like that was an effect that I like. It's one of the subtler ones, but like I enjoyed that as well.
Just makes it that much more jarring, which adds to the drama of the scene.
I think it's so incredible, this scene. There's a shot of in the documentary. Apparently, this is not one of the later ones they did. They had this done. So when Joe Hisaishi comes on board, he watches some of what they have finished with the animation. He sees this and he's like, "Oh my god, that was so good." That was Joe Hisaishi's and then the second scene I want to highlight with the animation was not done when Hisaishi came on board, and is one of the last scenes that they finished, which is Kaguya and Sutemaru flying through the air towards the end of the movie. Both of these scenes are the moments which are like forgotten, like they happen, and then magically Kaguya is transported back to the capital. It's like, is this a dream? Is it not a dream? Probably moon people magic bringing her back. I don't know. Like in the flying scene, you literally see the moon is the cause, I guess, because she is afraid of it when they come in front of it. But yeah, them flying through the air together. I was blown away by this scene too. The scene is I believe the only scene in the movie which uses CG. So I think it's notable. Alex, you're right. Like the scene before we were talking about is the only one that diverges in terms of that style. But this scene also diverges in its own way because they add in this CG element to it, and they like transpose the characters over the background, which is the whole movie, by the way. They paint the watercolor background, they paint the characters and the storyboard, and they try to fit them together. But here you're like actually using the computer to move them, and then this is the other extreme of the movie, right? Like this is the high point of the joy that you feel through Kaguya, and I also think it's absolutely incredible. The joy that's conveyed through them flying. He's like very adamant about wanting to feel that through, and when they're talking about the music, I think the music in both of these scenes ends up being incredible from Hisaishi. Any thoughts on this flying scene?
It's a good scene. I'll say that in Ghibli, the girl and boy flying together through the sky is kind of a used scene. So like,
look, I don't think Takahata's done this, so you don't
that's
fault him
fair.
for this.
He's like, okay, I gotta use it.
This
once.
This is up to me. This is up there with the Spirited Away flying scene. I think like it's that good. That's my opinion. I mean, this is even. I feel like this movie is more of a heavy scene for them. I mean, that's like a climax of the film. That's a heavy, like very important scene. But this is like the emotional crux of half of what we're going for with the movie. I think it's just so important and builds right into the ending with the moon people coming back. And you really get the sense of the joy she feels when she's trying to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do want to hear takes on the Kaguya Sutemaru relationship, because I'm a little bit conflicted about it.
You're not a big shipping. I mean, I don't think this is like supposed to be the big ship of the movie. Yeah. It's just like this connection she has. It is at the end. Sutemaru's like, I don't. Who cares about my wife and child? I'll run off.
Right.
Yeah. It's an interesting turn to take there, but
yeah, April. What do you think of their connection, Kaguya and Sutemaru?
I think that they really wanted it to be like romantic, and up until like that point, I would say that I never really got that sense. I just looked at like Sutemaru as sort of like that placeholder as to like the life that she had before moving to the capital. And so whenever she's like, oh, like I would have been happy with you, I didn't really like take that as like fueled by romance. I think for me it felt more like she's saying like I would have been happy with like a simpler life, not in the capital, like that, like versus, you know, like, oh, like I have no love in my life, like I would marry you kind of thing. So, and I mean that could have been like a possible outcome if like she had never gone to the capital, and I could see that. But I mean, the scene is very pretty and it looks very good, but for me, like, I didn't catch the romance, and I'm assuming it was supposed to be there. So
yeah, I don't think of this as an epic romance. I think you're right when you say Sutamaru is representative of the life she had in the country. I think that's his main purpose. The other thing is that this is like representative of a first love, a young love.
Yeah.
So
maybe
I
like
think,
a first crush, kind of, if she were to have one.
and it's like what we could have had. It's not, she does see him at one point in the middle of the movie, but I don't think the point is that it's like an epic romance, but we certainly feel the joy of her reconnecting with someone she could have had this life with. Yeah. And she could have had the overall life of being back home. Yeah.
And I guess like looking at this through like a Western lens, you could probably like connect a lot of stuff through like the superhero stories that we're used to, where like Superman, right? Like he comes from an alien planet, he has to learn about humanity and like why it's worth protecting. And then later on, he does get a love interest that he like is specifically attached to, but like that is more representative of like the fact that through his life he's learned to understand why humanity is so valuable. And like Kaguya, it's a similar thing. Like Sutamaru is more like it's more there just because like we can't bring that gang of four little kids back as adults, I guess. Like I think that would have had a similar effect. But like Sutamaru is like a specific human that we can like connect to, and like Kaguya is at this point. It's like like I am able to be happy with humans because there are good things about them. So but like I just like, again, like this fits for like the first part of that movie where like Kaguya is like learning how to be friends with these people, and it's a very sweet stuff that I guess gets tied up at the end with the Sutamaru stuff.
Yeah, hot takes on Lois Lane from Alex, I guess. I don't know if that was a hot take, but no, and I do think there is a big connection. I felt the connection. I mean, I don't think it's a grand romance, but I think there's a connection with Sutamaru and Kaguya. And
there's definitely a connection, and I think the fact that like he continues to call her Little Bamboo simply because he doesn't know her as Princess Kaguya, or he doesn't even know about that name. Yeah. So I think that sort of helps play into that like connection that she's sort of missing in her life at that point in time as well. Like he calls her Little Bamboo. He doesn't know her as Princess Kaguya. Princess Kaguya is someone that is like being sought out by male suitors who just want her because she's pretty and they don't really know her or anything along those lines. So I think there's that point is to be made as well. And we know that like names are always like a big thing in like Japanese like folklore and things like that. So I think that adds to it.
Yeah, we've talked about the theme of names and identity and how that plays in. I do. It's possible he does know that she's Kaguya just because she's well known throughout. But like to me, to him, that's not her, right? That's that's someone he doesn't even know. And I think like it is a little weird that this potential romance happens from her being like a little kid and he's much older, but then she's like fast growing. So it's like, how does that work? But I think the important thing is it's from her perspective. So she's like she sees him as this figure. I do think the whole movie is from Kaguya's perspective. So like we see the affection she feels for him, and we kind of like understand that based on the experiences she went through growing up with him, and also that he's representative of the life she had to leave behind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that she was forced out of. So I think there's something to be said about that as well. The fact that she had no choice in the matter, which I mean. Going back to the theme of this movie, we don't have a choice in being alive, and we don't get a choice in growing, up, older, whatever sometimes. So, yeah,
definitely. And I think that brings up the character of the dad, who I think is interested to hear your guys' opinion on the bamboo cutter himself, or Miyatsuko, but interested, is he a sympathetic figure in the story? Is he a villainous figure, or is he like more somewhere in the middle?
I think he's all of those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. Does that mean you like him because he is so complex?
I think he's human, but like I do. But again, I guess like this is just from me in my like Western culture perspective. Like I definitely like don't like agree with how pushy he was with what he wanted for her.
Yeah.
But that's, something that happens worldwide. It was very like sweet, in the beginning how, he cared so much for her, but even in the beginning you could sort of see like the toxicity of the relationship, especially whenever like the boys are like cheering like Little Bamboo and he's like, Princess come here, Princess come here. And he's like getting like you can see him getting like flustered and upset because she's was going towards the boys, but then going back to herself or back to her father.
Alex, what do you think?
Well, I'm with April that like it's a bit complicated because like on Space, no, the dad is not a sympathetic character because it's ignoring Kaguya and to an extent his wife in many instances.
Large extent.
Yeah, but at the same time, like that's the setting of this movie, and it's like it's the 11th century, so men are the heads of the household. They make all the decisions, and that's just how it was. So and I'm sure, like in folklore as well, like these kinds of stories, part of it is like instilling, like you gotta respect your elders and the decisions that they make and stuff. So, like, I don't want to say outright that it's bad, but like at the same time, like the dad makes so many questionable decisions here. In addition, like jumping off of what April said, it like in the first half. But the fact that like he's very resentful of the country life, like he calls them hillbillies, even though like they probably lived there for a while themselves, like feels a bit off. But I guess like once you are presented with gold coming out of a bamboo shoot, your perspective on life changes maybe. But like so at the same time, like in the third act, they like really try to bring you back. Like no, like he still cares about Kaguya. He wants what's best for her. He gets into very protective dad mode. Like we won't let them take you from us, So like that like tries to like bring you back to like no, dad's a good person at heart. He's just got a little misled by like society and what society tells us is important. But so like I think that the movie is trying to make dad be in the right by the end of this, but it's a bit tough to watch, especially in the second act when we got to deal with all the suitor stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think he, even in the third act, I think he I mean, at the end it's pretty sad when they're like left behind and crying, but he's like, I think he wants to protect Kaguya because she's his. Like I think that's how he views Kaguya throughout the whole movie. Even at the end, like he's on the right side of not wanting her to leave, but he always really views her as a means to an end for his life, not that villainously or specifically. I don't think he comes across like super conniving like that. It's just what he's doing in his very selfish perspective. I mean, I think he's a really interesting character in the movie. Honestly, maybe in the you could almost characterize him as Takahata's version of these really complex female villains that Miyazaki has, like a Lady Eboshi type. I think he's kind of the villain of the movie for large parts of it.
I would say so. Like he's like a less like outright villain. Simply because
he's in a heroic position, but he has continuously takes villainous actions.
Mm-hmm. So, and I think, I mean, like, I guess you sort of have to break like that stigma that a villain is someone who wants to take over the world. And while he may have had, but every villain has like quote unquote good intentions in their pursuit of whatever. And so I guess you could say his good intentions are he just wants what's best for his daughter. But at the same time, like he's sort of taking a lot of actions that are, obviously not making her happy. And I think that all gets especially like culminated in whenever she is saying to her father, like, if that's, like, if you really want me to go marry like the emperor or whoever, just so you can have that seat. Like, I'll go do it, but then I'm gonna kill myself. And so, like, I think that, like, sort of is the culmination of their relationship as well. Like, she's like, if that's what's going to make you happy, fine, I'll do it. But then I'm gonna I'm gonna release myself of this. So
yeah, that's brutal. That part. Yeah, I mean, I think he takes all these unsympathetic actions, but the movie does it's not interested in painting him as a bad, just a straightforward bad person. I think he has interesting complexities of emotions. You feel for him at different points. The movie also starts from his perspective. It's really interesting. So I think he ends up being like this pretty like complex character that you feel a lot of different things for. And in the documentary, you see voice actor Takeo Chi, who I think dies before this movie ends up being released, but he's like struggling with the character and trying to find what the character like is drives, and it does. I think it plays into how this is such a hard to pin down character, and the voice actor was really trying to figure it out along with Takahata as they're making the movie. The mom, who's also the narrator of the movie, which I think is interesting. Takahata movies will have narrators a lot of the time. I've definitely noticed, and but this one not as heavy, I think, as some of his other ones. Definitely like Pompoko. But I was
like, the narration in this movie like worked, especially because when it did happen, it was usually like, and so this happened, and then 3 years later, and then you're like right back into it. So
yeah. Minimal narration, but I think the mom's a good character too. Not as much to do as the dad. I love the scene of the two of them in the garden a few times with Kaguya. I think she. At some point, I feel like she was not in the movie much, and then I think there ends up being enough depth there for a character that I think she is a memorable character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. Like, the mom is very much like the opposing force to the dad, almost, in a sense, because even from like the beginning, when Kaguya first comes, to them, like, she grows, like, she turns into like a baby as soon as like she touches the mom. And then like there's like a moment, and I remember like the dad is like, oh, give her here, and the mom's like, she doesn't want you, she wants to be with me. Like, and I think that's like, thinking back on it, that's a little bit of like foreshadowing when you think about it, because even like when they're in the capital, like the mom still has her garden, like she's still, like making cloth and clothes, so I think that says like a lot about the mom, that she's that representation as well of the rural life that Kaguya like enjoyed.
That's a good call with them in the beginning. Also at that part of the movie, then the mom magically produces milk in order to feed Kaguya. Which is interesting.
So as a woman, I fully enjoyed that scene because she just stops, and I was like, oh no. Like, and you could see the look on her face, and I was like, there's something happening to her specifically. Like, and then she's like, wait, here, I got this. And I was like, oh, okay, like, there you go. Especially because I've had friends who've like had babies before, and so they kind of like described it in like what I saw. It just like happens. Like, one day, like, you're just normal, and the next day you're producing like milk for a baby. So.
And that's not even real magic with...
that's not even real magic. That's just life.
Well, wait, but in the movie, it's magic, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, she doesn't give birth to it, right?
Okay, yeah. I was going to say, like, this is the second Takahata movie with magical body parts.
Not as prominent in this one.
In real life, you have to actually be pregnant.
Right. Okay.
Like, trigger itself to be like, hey, you need to produce milk for this thing you're growing inside of you.
But that's part. But briefly, I guess, on the mythology around that topic. But yeah, that's part of the magic of Kaguya growing up very fast in the beginning. Which and you later learn she's like a moon person, and I guess that vaguely is a result of that. And also, so I think the sparse like fantasy mythology elements throughout, but culminating with the moon people coming down, I guess, is probably the biggest one. But I think used to striking effect, especially in the beginning of the movie. I wanted to talk more about Kaguya's character specifically, which I know we have a lot, but there's a few other elements too, especially this whole notion of her experiences in the capital and the suitors, but also her growing accustomed to the conventions of being a noble lady in older Japan. And I feel like seeing all this through Kaguya's lens and her emotions with dealing all this and rejecting this is the kind of feminism Takahata is imbuing into the story, which I think is potentially there even to a certain extent in the original. I'm not sure, but you get a lot of her dealing with the conventions of what being a noble woman in this time period consists of. We talked about this kind of anguish period of her life, that's all in that, and then everything with the suitors who she eventually uses to it has her sense of agency kind of forced upon the situation that she's in. But I think it's interesting looking at this as the oldest Japanese story and kind of how Takahata tells it through kind of a modern lens with more modern gender roles. April, how did it come across to you?
I thought it was very I'm trying to think of how to describe it appropriately and put it into words. But I really I liked how Kaguya, even in a time period where women didn't have a lot of agency or control over their lives, essentially, I love that there were moments where she did and she had those opportunities. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very unfortunate that some of those opportunities were her just sort of giving in to, her father's wishes in a sense, learning, actually becoming a noble lady very seriously, and sort of settling down in that. But I love the moment whenever the 5 princes are in front of her and they're describing her, and they, one calls her a jeweled branch and a robe or something along, those descriptions, and then she's like, all right, well, go find me these treasures. I love that she took control of that situation, and then she even knew how to counter whenever they did eventually come back, and obviously there was the fake jeweled branch, which I was really curious. I was like, well, how are you gonna fake that? And I was like, oh, I guess someone could make it, but then how would you find out? And then the guy showed up and I was like, perfect. And then she tells the one guy to set the robe on fire, and I was like, all right, so I really love that in a sense she was able to control that situation to her wishes. But the whole scene with the one emperor guy, that one was, whatever. That one was a little triggering for me. I mean, it was very realistic and totally 100% believable, but I was just I don't like this. This makes me feel dirty. I want to go go wash myself after this. I'm glad that she was able to find a way out of it, but at the same time, I was just I hate men. Why? So
the Emperor of Japan, and he grabs her, and that's what causes her to not on purpose cry out to the moon.
And to want to go back. So I think that, and I think even in that moment, it says just a lot about, because there's always consequences for our actions, and so maybe she was much too quick to be I want to go back to the I want out of here at any cost kind of thing. But because I mean, there are things that have taken place in my life that I wish I could go back to the moon for.
Definitely.
So I mean, I guess, and I think that's also why like the ending struck me and was felt very tragic to me as well, just because like in a hasty moment or in a very bad moment, she just wanted out of it, and they were like, okay, well, we're gonna just completely take you away, and she didn't have a choice in that matter either. So I like the moments where they did give her agency, but like the moments that were very realistic, I was very sad during. So
that's a good point. This movie is like littered with her not having control over her own fate, whether it be the moon people taking her back or her dad forcing her to the capital.
Yeah.
It is very sad. And yeah, the scene when the emperor, assaults her, I think it's very, very deep, that the one thing that makes her, not want to live and to be, not want to feel the human experience, which is what all the movie's about, is this assault, and taps into like one of the least moments of agency and one of the worst things, like I think that resonates in older Japan to modern times that women and other people go through. And I definitely found that very powerful, that scene, and it felt very modern despite also feeling realistic to the time period the movie's taking place in.
Yeah, and I think another like scene that really stood out for me in terms of like Kaguya is just before like the party or her name celebration. It's during it, and she's just like, what is the point of a party if I don't get to enjoy it? Like this is a party for me. And I think because that then leads into the scene with the kimonos like flying off of her and everything like that. But like whenever she spoke those words, I was like, I felt very like connected to her, and I was like, ooh, sis, like you were born in the wrong time, like.
Yeah.
So, because I mean, she's right. Like, what is the point of a party? Because she wanted to invite people, and it was like, well, this is why, like, because you wouldn't get to enjoy their company. But then even after that, like, that's whenever she sort of really gives in, and like then one of the next scenes afterwards is like her having her eyebrows plucked out, and yeah, that hurt.
Yeah, moments of her, and then also talking about her agency, she does ultimately kind of rebuff the suitors, and there's a period of her getting to do what she wants, and Lady Sagami leaves, and there's a wonderful scene with the cherry blossoms.
I teared up whenever she presented her with the cherry blossom tree. I was like, oh gosh, like.
Yeah, Alex, how do you think Kaguya as a character ultimately turns out? Is she one of the more memorable, maybe Ghibli protagonists looking back, or do you think more of the film as a whole?
I think she's definitely a stronger one. I could see people underrating her for sure, because like there's a lot going on beneath the surface. In addition to what you guys were talking about with like the suitor stuff, like I think also they do a good job of looping in the overall theme of humanity as well. Like there's that scene where she's talking with the Lady Sagami, and like she's laying out the different things that she needs to do, to the point of like blackening her teeth. It's like, well, like people are gonna see that when I laugh, and the lady's like, well, you're not supposed to laugh when you're late. It's like, well, then I'm not even human, So it's like this like dehumanization of in this movie. It's specific to the royals, but I think that definitely the subtext is that in general women are dehumanized by like having to follow all these social norms. And further on, like with the rejecting the suitors, like she makes it know, like they're all fake gifts, because that's how they see me, as just like kind of a fake treasure that can be like played around with. And so like just like the way that they like go very like they in the text of the film, it's specifically about the royalness of it, and like feeling fake because she's coming from a rural background. But I definitely think that the movie does well to show like this is just like the female experience in this time period, and it's very unjust that people have to deal with that. So like I think that Kaguya in those scenes, while it does feel a little bit like heightened wisdom, like to the point where like especially those scenes where all five of them are like sitting in front, like it definitely gives off like King Solomon vibes almost. But so like it does feel a little different from the rest of the movie, but at the same time, I think that it keeps with the themes that Kaguya has throughout.
I think with with this as a summary, I think with the things, especially like blackening of the teeth and stuff, there's definitely customs that are about that what women go through in 10th century Japan when the movie's taking place, or sometime older in Japan. But I think this movie has surprisingly universal and powerful kind of feminist themes and messages, considering the time period and that a man in his late 70s is making the movie. I think that's to me one of the more striking aspects that you end up getting from Kaguya.
Yeah. And I definitely wouldn't I don't know if it ever received the type of criticism that it was like sort of anti-feminist or anything like that. But I think that I appreciate that Takahata stuck very closely to like actual Japanese culture at that time when it came to like the world that Kaguya was living in. So, which makes, the small moments where she does, make decisions for herself and everything like that much more impactful.
Well, if anything, I'd be interested to see if there's criticism of him, dealing with tradition in this sense, like exposing its because some people have a problem, right, with applying modern norms to the 10th century and all.
Yeah.
But this is a display. No, we need to shine a light that this was terrible back then and today. People who are a bit too precious with their tradition, I could see criticizing stuff like this.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm not aware of any sort of criticism for Kaguya, but like I said, pretty universal critical praise. But I also don't have a Susan Napier chapter on this book, unfortunately. So, or on this movie. So, I think interesting discussion of those themes. And another, we've touched on this. I think more subtle in this movie than say And Only Yesterday, but I think this in terms of environmentalism, talking about Studio Ghibli, I think we definitely have this theme of wanting to go back to a country life that pervades most of Takahata's films, I would say. Yeah, Only Yesterday, it's one of the main things going on. And even like a Pompoko, they're resisting the urbanization, of course. So I think here's another example when she's kind of learning for her simpler life. I don't think it comes across so much as kind of an environmental moral, so much as maybe we're just wanting a simpler life, wanting to go back to where she had control. At the very least, more subtle if it does come across as maybe this environmental moral. So I think you do kind of continue all these. It does have all these elements of previous Takahata films and Studio Ghibli films in general, even if he's working within the context of a pretty rigid structure from the original fable.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that that for at least for me, I enjoyed the first third of the movie. I can see people maybe complaining that it's a bit slow, but I think it's good in displaying how she's growing up in this setting, just doing things like learning how to crawl and walk based on watching the frogs, getting into shenanigans with the crew, stealing melons and cutting them in the bush. It's establishing this is the how she's growing up, having these very normal experiences without any worry for what people think of her, really, to the point where she gets called a little bamboo a lot, but she finds no issue with it because she's in this relatively safe space compared to the shift that we get when we go to the capital and everything it feels a lot more threatening. So I enjoy that we spend a lot of time in that setting in the first part of the movie, there's not really that much going on except just watching her grow before our eyes. But I think that is a big piece of why you feel connected to her and despair with her when she goes through all that stuff once the move happens.
Yeah, definitely. I think I also really like the first third, but I like all the thirds. But I think it's purposefully different. So I guess exactly what you said, so that you get the sense of joy of life for when she goes through the despair of being forced into the situation and forced to fit into these cultural norms. Yeah, and I want, yeah, well, should be noted the little bamboo. Yeah, she's called Takenoko and Hime by her parents just as much as she is Kaguya, if not more, I think. So also interesting things, probably more so with identity and names, as she's not given a specific name. Hime is kind of her name, princess, for most of her life, it seems like.
But even that is like, it's a title, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's probably why like her preference was, was always Little Bamboo, just because it was a name
you
given.
can see how
to
that'd be appealing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was a name given to her based off like who she was and how she acted, versus like she was just instantly a princess to her father or to others. So
well, it was more like this is what I want you to become.
Yeah.
Versus Little Bamboo is like I'm that's what I am.
Yeah.
So she's also a little princess before she turned into a baby right in the beginning.
Yeah.
Interesting. Any further, we talked a lot about it, but any further thoughts on the final scene of when the moon people come down? I think such a striking sequence throughout the entire thing. I love the use of music, of the kind of just this like folksy, joyful music of the moon people coming down, even though it's like ominous, and then you get kind of more tragic music, and then it cut to when she's being taken back, the joyful music kind of resumes, and it's very clashing with what you hear versus what you're feeling at that time.
Yeah, I think that like the really like upbeat music almost is very like striking.
Yeah.
And I definitely was like paying attention to the music as I was watching everything else unfold, and I was just like, why is this music so happy? Can it stop being happy for like 2 seconds, please? Like there's a tragedy taking place.
Yeah, I definitely, and we should noting the music. This score is by Joe Hisaishi. This is the first time Hisaishi worked with Takahata. So he's exclusively does the scores of Miyazaki movies. Takahata eventually ends up wanting Hisaishi for this film, and Hisaishi had wanted to work with Takahata. Actually, Takahata was the person who initially hired Hisaishi to work with Miyazaki on Nausicaa, as he was the producer of Nausicaa. So he kind of come full circle with Hisaishi and Takahata. And I think I haven't dove into the score quite as much. Hisaishi's prominently featured in the documentary, which I think is very cool. But it's a lot of really interesting musical choices, such as at the ends there. And probably a lot of music that fits the time period, that kind of style.
That song like recurs about like the bugs and the beasts and all that. Like, is that original or existing? Do you know?
I don't know. I would assume original, but it is in the soundtrack. I think those songs. So it seems original. So yeah, I guess that'd be a part of the score.
Yeah, because like that's like another piece of mythology in this movie, that like the only thing she like remembers from the moon time before the revelation happens is apparently that song that she just had in her head, and like multiple times like she like keeps on singing after everyone is done, and like it's like a lot sadder. I enjoyed that bit.
Yeah. And her singing when she's revealing what she remembers about being a moon person is very striking too.
Yeah.
I love the end credits song, which is "When I Remember This Life" by Nikaido Kazumi, which another prominent part of the documentary is Takahata. Specifically, he was a fan of this singer, and going to record this song. Ghibli songs, probably not an underreported story, but like 20 incredible end credit songs across the Ghibli movies, like incredible success rate with these really great songs. I love how that feels after and he says he wanted like a softer thing after kind of the despair of the movie, so you get this warmer, softer song out of like the kind of sad ending you get. But yeah, I think the music ends up being a great component of the film as well overall. Were there any scenes we haven't talked about that you guys are thinking of?
Well, I want to say the actual like very very beginning of like her growing up and then like raising her, like just that, like we've talked about like bits and pieces, but just overall, The baby noise I do not like. That was very disturbing to hear multiple times. Like it feels like the stock crying noise that you hear in a lot of movies, and it's just like very jarring when it happens. But B, it's very cute to see the parents like so happy, like raising her, and like both amazed at like the different stuff that happens, but then also like rolling with it. It's even like with that scene where she's like learning how to crawl and walk, and like you can like just like sense like their like joy of like, oh wow, she's like finally doing it. Like there with like movies that involve babies, like for me it's a tough sell. Like this is like one of the movies that like it most feels like it depicts the joy of raising a child. Like I feel like a lot of movies like that doesn't quite come across, but the way they do these baby scenes, like it's one of the more effective versions of this that I've seen.
Yeah, I think a pretty joyful baby, and we're primarily intending to communicate the joy of that at that time. I think that comes through. I think her Kaguya is like a sister, like her servant assistant lady. I think she's very funny throughout the movie, with like the straight face, I guess. The Lady Sagami, any thoughts? I don't know. I think she ends up being a pretty traditional type of that figure.
Yeah, she wasn't. I mean, she wasn't super standout, I guess. I mean,
all the stuff that results. Yeah, Alex.
Well, like looping back to the music part of this movie, the scenes where Kaguya is playing that instrument with the lady are pretty fun. The koto, yeah, and like especially that scene where like she's like learning, she's like doing the lessons, she's like sort of good at it, but once her dad shows up, she's like perfect at it. Like there's like bits of humor like that sprinkled through the movie that are good moments, but also just in general, anytime that she plays that is just like a really nice pieces of music, and I want to. It does inspire me to like go look up more music with that instrument being used.
Yeah, I think that's cool. Yeah. I was gonna say all the suitor stuff. I think there's some fun sequences with the results of them.
I loved the one that brought her the flower, and then when they pull up the screen, his wife is there. I was like, that's a move. I'm there for that. Like,
that's good. There's the guy on the ship, which is apparently right from the Fable, but I think that's a pretty funny sequence too.
Yeah,
he's on the ship, and then the guy just dies.
I guess that's also a cool animated scene. Like the dragons, like are appearing as clouds, their like heads are like slowly popping through, and like also like the waves come like crashing down the ship. Like that's also like a pretty impressive piece of animation in this movie.
Yeah,
a lot of effort put into that very minor scene.
Yeah.
That's why this movie took 8 years to make. Yeah. So, I guess, random other background stuff from the documentary. That so this movie's produced by Yoshikai Nishimura, not Suzuki. As Suzuki's basically like, producing Takahata is a full-time job. I think someone else needs to do this. So Yoshikai Nishimura apparently spent every day for 18 months trying to convince Takahata to make one last movie. That's what he claims in the documentary.
My goodness.
So there you go. And
in Kingdom, he also seemed very haggard. Like there was a line where he was like, "I've spent like 3 years thinking just about Takahata. I'm not lying." So it's like okay, you're having a bit of a day.
Yeah, I think that's his first produced Ghibli movie, and then he goes. He's the founder of Studio Ponok, which is where a lot of the Ghibli crew goes to. So he produces Mary and the Witch's Flower, and hopefully some other movies from that studio. But yeah, I think he's involved with the last Ghibli film as well, which we'll talk about next week. So it was cool seeing him. I want to note that the voice acting was done before the animation was done. There's a script, so like unlike Miyazaki, there's an actual script, and then the voice acting was done very much in a script-driven process, and then the movie was animated. Whereas you see in the Miyazaki documentaries that the voices for were specifically the one notable voice acting choice I talked about in the last podcast was done after the animation. And I also want to note Kazuo Oga is the art director. It does all the watercolor backgrounds on the movie. But it was very interesting to see the artistic process. That's still definitely one of my main takeaways. We talked a lot after about all the kind of narrative and elements to it, which is very strong. But I got to think of this high up there for some of the most gorgeous movies you'll ever see with this, especially ones with distinctive styles. Yeah, I think I was going to say this earlier, but I just do feel very blessed that we did get this one last Takahata film. That does feel so much like a culmination of a lot of things of what he's going for. I do think this is going to go down as one of the all-time great animated films ever. And some people already talk about it in that vein, including myself. It's clearly so much effort went into eventually making this, and Takahata put so much of himself into it. And you never want to kind of devalue people as their creations. His life stands on its own without it, but it's also really incredible that we end up getting this movie. And he also seems happy that he's happy he does end up getting these, and does seem very happy with the quality at the end, which is nice.
Oh, that's good.
Alex, any final thoughts on Kaguya?
Yeah, Kaguya is a visually impressive movie. I think that there's a lot beneath the surface of this movie to dig into, as we've talked about. And in general, I think I said this on the Yamada's episode too. But Takahata is just it's been a great discussion piece, because he's a director who will take a lot of big swings with each production. So it feels very fitting that this is the last of his movies. I'm disappointed that there aren't more after this, but this feels like a good place to leave off. So Kaguya is definitely a nice piece to end on here.
Yeah, and if you've loved watching these Takahata ones, we can go back and watch some of his very early movies, some of the original anime films in Japan he directed.
Well, one last thing I want to bring from the documentary is Miyazaki said something Heidi was Takahata's best work. It's just okay, sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, Heidi gets brought up a bunch by them as an anime series they made. It's not even a movie, so I'd love to go back and watch Heidi, Girl of the Alps. Miyazaki keeps the goats from those. They feature.
Yeah, he was bringing them into a kitchen or whatever, and kept them by the windows.
The goats from Heidi. Yeah. Okay. April, final thoughts.
No, just that this is a really it's such a great movie, and it's so underrated, and I think that more people need to watch it. So I think people would appreciate it, especially because you can tell that so much went into it. I mean, not just 8 years, but
yeah, definitely. And I think it is thought of very highly, but also it's still underwatched by a lot of people. Yeah. It's Takahata's first film he directed, The Great Adventure of Oris, Prince of the Sun, in 1968. I think he's 30. And this is seriously one of the OG anime movies from Studio, I think Toei is where they were originally. So yeah, that would be if you want to go back to all those, and the Panda Go Panda movies.
I'm also on Takahata's Wikipedia page. I guess he also did some collaboration for the Red Turtle. I've heard of that movie.
Yeah, he was involved in the Red Turtle, which was not Studio Ghibli, but they contributed animation, I think, to that.
Yeah, and I've heard that one's also visually unique. So maybe that's where I gotta go next.
I think so. Yeah, that's a good one too. Very later on. I guess that was after. Yeah, I don't know what the timeline was on his contributions to that. But yeah, so I'm very happy to talk about Kaguya and all of Takahata's works. Like I said, that's been one of my big takeaways from this series, was having such a reverence for Takahata and his films. It's love Kaguya, one I should watch more often. Not like the super breezy watch that you can just go to, but I think it's one I should make sure I'm revisiting along with some of these Miyazaki films for sure. Let us know what you thought of Kaguya. Anywhere you can find all the ways to contact us at overlyanimated.com. Thanks to all our patrons for this podcast. You can support us via Patreon at patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to the patron of the podcast, Connie, and thanks to our patron executive producers, Ryan Seabox, Beatrice, Hugh, Michael, Needle, and Phoenician. The last Ghibli rewatch will be next week when Marnie was there. So, not very similar to this movie, but we'll be getting into everything from when Marnie was there. It'll be a fun one to end on. I will see all of you there. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.